This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
Hey, this is Erin with Cornell Studio Supply, located in the Gem City of Dayton, Ohio. As a proud sponsor of this episode and the Brickyard Network, we are happy to help you with all your pottery and ceramic sculpture needs by providing the best customer service and world-class workshops. Join us January 17th to the 19th for a hands-on dual workshop with Dita Mert and Jeremy Randall. Visit cornellstudiosupply.com to sign up. At Cornell Studio Supply, we are owned and operated for potters by potters.
Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 531 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today, I welcome back Sunshine Cobb, who is talking about her new role as the resident coordinator at the Archie Bray Foundation. This is part of our series featuring former residents at the Bray, and this is all leading up to the application deadline to be a Bray resident, which this year is December the 19th. In this interview, we talk about how shifts in the residency structure have helped to create equity and opportunity for residents, as well as how residents find financial stability as the cost of living is increasing in both Helena, Montana, where the Bray is located, and across the U.S. Before we get to today's episode, I wanted to mention that my holiday sale is now live with over 50 new pots. These make great gifts for your loved ones, and I am happy to offer you, the listener, free shipping. To receive this special offer, all you have to do is make a purchase before December the 16th at carterpottery.com and use the offer code podcast at checkout. This offer is good for listeners in the continental United States only, but I did want to mention that I do ship internationally. You can shop now at carterpottery.com. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. Let's start talking about the new position that you have at the Bray, and you're helping to be a liaison between the residents and the structure of the Bray itself. So can you talk about how this job kind of happened and what you do?
Well, first, let me introduce myself. This is Sunshine Cobb. I am currently the resident coordinator at the Bray, also former resident, and a former visiting artist, and a former summer resident. I've sort of occupied a lot of space on this campus at different times in my life. I feel like I want to give you a little bit of the backstory. I came here originally in 2011 as a summer resident, came back in 2012 as a long-term, came back as a visiting artist, maybe 5 years later than that, something like that. That runs together. But anyways, fell in love with Montana, and a lot of my resident group ended up settling here. So I had this sort of group of friends here. And after I'd left the Bray and was out working in the world and stuff, ended up choosing to move back. So I moved back at the very end of 2018, as a working potter, and I can do what I do from anywhere. So I set up sort of shop here, and because I just had a group of friends here. So that's sort of how I got back to Montana from the resident sort of side of things. And then basically, COVID times hit, all the craziness. One of the things of being a independently employed person, um, you kind of have to reinvent yourself every year. So the truth was, I was kind of looking for a break from that. So I kind of reached out to Rebecca in, gosh, it would have been last year. So that would have been 2023, to come on as sort of summer help. The influx of summer residents, it doubles the pool of residents. And because I still have friends that worked here, I kind of knew, I was like, oh, they're a bit overwhelmed. Maybe I can just come out for the summer and help out. So I kind of came in as a consultant at that point, and then kind of discovered there was a great need for some leadership within the residency program. In that, when Rebecca came on, she came on as an executive director and not necessarily resident director. So that role also shifted in the last few years. And so there was a little bit of a gap as far as, and the truth is, coming out of COVID and really residency in the past 10 years has changed dramatically across the scope of residency programs in the country. So I sort of came on and then was offered a kind of more full-time position towards the end of last year, and sort of gave it a go this year. So I'm resident coordinator, and that basically means I work closely with the residents. I'm helping with programming for them, but also helping them find housing when they come here. I am working within the staff to advocate for them in different ways, working with them on professional development, tallying their firing fees. I'm sort of doing all the sort of things that are related to their residency program, but also, like, my office is in the resident center. So I'm just there in a weird way, like, to check in, make sure everybody's doing okay. Transplanting to Montana can be difficult for folks. And I think as we diversify our program, it brings up lots of issues for folks that are kind of unforeseen in their move here, because you're with a group of people, and if personalities and lifestyles mesh, it's great. If not, people can feel isolated and alone and homesick if they've just come out of a grad program or something. There's that transition time that happens that sometimes they need a little bit of support. And so that's sort of how I see my role as far as navigating conflicts with residents, working sort of, maybe that's interpersonal. Sometimes that can be resident conflict with the organization, that kind of stuff.
You mentioned that a lot of folks come out of grad school or undergrad and then they come to the Bray. And the Bray is wonderful that it has a structure, but it's very accommodating to the resident. As long as you don't break anything or, destroy the campus, the Bray is pretty open to, okay, you want to try a new style of firing, then here's some kilns you can do that with. But one of the questions I have for you is, how do you help residents when they don't necessarily know exactly what they need, but they know they need something, but they can't put it into words? Like, how have you been able to cultivate being a good listener to try to figure out, like, okay, what does this person actually need from the Bray?
I'm not here to help with their creative particular journey. That, to me, I leave up to them. I think in part, I am working, or what I've maybe run into in the past year and a half is the sort of people seeing themselves here, or not seeing that they're like, I don't think there's a space for me here, even though they're here. And so I think that sort of identity crisis, or the words are escaping me, the imposter syndrome. I think what I've witnessed a lot is that happening with our residents. And that happens in, I think, this kind of shift, and we've talked about a little bit in the past, is like a shift in the resident pool, but also a shift in the organization, in that as we attempt to kind of diversify our resident pool. So that's everything from experience level to age to background. All of that kind of stuff feeds into this kind of melting pot we have here. This organization, though, has catered to people that are very, to use a kind of horrible term, bootstraps. They lift by the bootstrap, and it's a very independent journey. And what I have witnessed is that as we diversify who we're inviting here or who's applying here, there's big cultural differences within different kinds of backgrounds with clay. So, that there are people that work way more communally with their community, and then there are the sort of individualists that come here. So for me, it's bridging that gap of, how do we help folks that feel a bit adrift here. Like in that, like a perfect example is we are having a show at NCECA this year. I announced at a resident meeting, hey, we got an NCECA show. It's really exciting. One of the summer residents was like, after the whole hoopla of the meeting, was like, what is NCECA? Right? They're part of a culture that doesn't participate in that. So in that, for me, it's often challenging what I think everybody knows about clay or the clay community or the clay structure, ceramics industry, whatever you want to call, and backstepping that to what does the experience of being at the Bray look like for the individual, but then also that cohort group that we're trying to help, and also just I think in part respond with better practices for people and in a way that is not everyone that comes here is motivated by having a career in ceramics that follows the trajectory of being in magazines and workshopping and selling work. It can be a very different goal for developing their work and how they put that out in the world. But I think one of my tasks is also to figure out how to make sure that everyone is welcome in the kind of way that we're engaging with them, in that we have representation for them in galleries. We have representation for them, if it's not in our sales gallery, in more exhibition space, or we work with them to create opportunities for juried exhibitions that they lead, something like that, whatever kind of in some way caters to the way that they would like to participate in the ceramic world and us supporting them in that. And kind of diverse, like cross collaborating with education and admin and the gallery and the residency and how and even the clay biz, how each of those components of the Bray can lift and support the interests of the residents. So that's it's kind of a weird, it's not super like they want to come make fluffy clay. Like I don't know how to make fluffy clay. Maybe David does. It's like that's the thing. But that idea there, I think there are resources here if people do feel like they belong, that uh and mostly have to communicate with us of like, hey, tell me your needs. And so I'm that person that kind of when you go to someone's house and they're like, oh, I've got dessert, and you're like, oh, I'm okay, it takes them like 3 times to offer, and you're like, fine, I'll take a piece. I'm kind of that person where I'm like, no, here, tell me, to make sure that uh I'm not proposing my own agenda, but I'm also listening to what their maybe quieter agenda is.
Well, one of the things that you've made changes is to start people on the same foot. So what used to happen is because there was a rotating acceptance of Bray people, meaning like some people would come in June, some would come in August. Most people would try to come before the summer because it's awesome. So they, wanted to get there, but people would potentially come at different times. And one of the things you did is you standardized it. So everyone comes at the same time. And also everyone has like a week or so of training where they talk to Bray staff, like myself, like I did like a little 5-minute talk for the residents and just told them like, this is what the podcast network is, and this is what we do. And you did that with all of the staff members. So all the residents are starting with an education about what the Bray is, what their role is, and how the staff can help them essentially. So what do you think the value of that type of week of training is? And have you seen it work? Like, do you think this group has really gotten a lot out of that?
Yeah, I do. One of the things I think Rebecca really wanted to do when she came on was to create hey, everybody gets here the same week. That was really a push by Rebecca to sort of change that calendar. Because I do think it goes along with formalizing and being transparent about our application process and what that looks like. So having everyone start at the same time, this was the first year that we did that. So everyone started the beginning of June. And then, right, everybody, most of the staff, heads of department at least gave presentations about their department, and it was a week long of training and kind of settling into the studio and that kind of stuff. I feel like it's been a tremendous success, in that everybody gets the same information at the same time. They may not, and that was one of the things, I think, even myself as a resident, I was mostly asking other residents like, "Hey, what was that? Have you had this thing yet?" And I feel like it was a trickle down of information that was corrupted in that trickle down, and like often needed to be corrected. So in this way, I think we also like front load the capacity of the Bray and the capacity of the staff at the Bray, because I think, one of the interesting things here is that, like every person that gave a presentation is a maker in their own right here on staff, right? And so being able to say, hey, the guy in the clay biz that's getting your clay, he's also a maker. And that I think in a way to help them find some connectivity to other departments on campus, because I think what we kind of saw was this kind of what I witnessed was a lot of kind of really, gosh, I don't know how to say this politically or kindly, is that kind of a mistreatment of the staff of being people's servant in some fashion, and that there wasn't a respect for people just doing their jobs and trying to make a living and also trying to make art on the side or whatever that kind of looked like for people. And I think that, and that can happen at different places on campus more so than others, as far as like if you think about um the people in the clay beds being kind of treated as like, I need this and I need it now, very, kind of on demand type of stuff, versus having a respect for their space and time and all they're trying to accomplish during their work hours, in addition to finding some space in their hearts and brains to be creative after work. So I do think in that respect, I think it helped, because what I have witnessed in this current group is that we have a couple of folks that are kind of interested in wood firing, and there's a few, mostly a few folks on staff that wood fire. So they feel much more compelled to go talk to them, because truly in this case, these people on staff have decades of wood fire experience compared to these folks who have been wood firing for a year or two, right? So I think there is a wealth of information that's not just, we have clay for you. We also have a lot of information to share, and if approached with kindness and generosity, you'll be met with that. And so I think in that part, um, I think it's been very helpful. The other part of it is in that idea of the Bray has grown so much as far as facility and staff. It's hard to uh, see how everything works together. And I especially think since COVID, the kind of overlap and the bridges between the spaces and the buildings and the people in those buildings has been widened in a way. And so really I'm trying to knit that back together and sort of, help folks go, oh, okay, this, like, the kind of going over education and having a meeting with Stephanie and yourself, like, hey, these folks handle this part of it. They're going to be your wealth of information. I think one of the things that I have also been working with staff is, let's set the tone with which we would like to work with the residents. And I think in that, us being leaders among the sort of group to say, hey, these are the expectations I have. Everybody's gonna, some people are gonna meet those, some people are gonna fail those. But the truth is you were given the correct information and you have an opportunity to participate in this way. So I do think it's been really helpful to set clear, it's like my nannying background. I was like, have clear expectations, we'll work towards those, that kind of thing. And that's how, I raised a 2-year-old, and that's how, I try to sort of set my own goals for myself, So I do think it's part of how I exist in the world, and am in a way, like, I think depending on, our resident pool, we have some people that have been in practice for 30 years here right now. And we have some people that are relatively new to clay and just, have a undergrad degree. And so that vastness of experience, there has to be some level of playing field for everyone to connect on. And in part, we do that, by, um, having the same guidelines for everybody, that sort of, I really am trying to get away from the kind of specialized like treatment, or if the squeaky wheel always asks and always gets, I want that same opportunity for everybody. So I think in part, it's been for me and the rest of the staff, let's standardize our practice. Let's be transparent about it. Let's be clear, instead of, because like when I came on, it was like you could ask 4 different people and get 4 different answers. And that was very problematic, because it's kind of like the news. You turn on the news you want to hear. And that was kind of, oh, well, I finally got the answer I want, so that's the one I'm going to go with instead of this is the answer. So I think that's been part of me um, trying to articulate, like, we need to have clear messaging, clear communication, clear guidelines, clear dates for the residents, so that they can be free to explore and work and be creative in their space. And we just have to hold that structure for them.
One of the areas that the Bray has been criticized in the past is for being elitist. And I think that was largely a function of actually just math and remoteness. So if 200 people apply and there's 10 spots for long term and 10 spots in the summer, it's not an arrogance that means that only 20 people get selected. It was practical. Like there's space for 20 people. So it doesn't matter how many people apply, we got space for 20 people.
Yeah.
But there's also a bigger sort of philosophy that's changing in the art world about equity and how to create equity through transparent application processes, transparency within the structure of an organization itself. Can you talk about how you've been able to sort of enable equity as a part of the staff in terms of how people apply and the benefits that they get as residents?
This place has a crazy history with that sort of, elitism is kind of the right word in a way, because I think we've been, in a weird way, very academic, like a secondary academic institution in a way. And but it's also been, who do you know and who can you call, who can you ask to, if there's a spot and that kind of thing. And so I think, you know, um, in the sort of effort to be more transparent, I think it's also, I actually think it's an investment in enriching the diversity among our people, and that in the folks that come as residents, they're going to meet people they would have probably never met out if they're just following a academic career, or if they're just following a gallery studio practice. Um, so in part, we're trying to develop or create cohorts that will bridge the sort of gaps in some of our education, our experience, our kind of um, single view that takes us into the world, right? And so I think in the past it has been a lot of behind the scenes. There were 3 people on a jury to pick residents. They were just never published, and there was never any kind of statement around that. So I do think right now the model that we're kind of following is we have a jury of folks that usually have been visiting artists here at some point, so they're kind of familiar with this space. Um, and they kind of pick from the pool of folks that apply. And then this year, for the first year, which I can't believe that Bray's almost 75 years old, and this is the first time we've ever done resident interviews. And I think that was crazy to me that that was the first time that we had ever done that. Um, and what I think was amazing about that was just how much, one, we could see if we had the resources to meet people's needs, but also it gave me personally a lot of insight into thinking about what do these very different kinds of people need to thrive here in Helena, Montana, right? In part, we are remote. We're predominantly white as a town, and have gotten more and more conservative in our kind of leanings with the post Trump era, whatever the kind of nightmare landscape we have. But Montana is also a very individualistic, libertarian type of place of, like, truthfully, when I was a resident, I met more gay couples that just bought a ranch and lived out, and they were Joan and Pat, and they just lived 30 years here. Like, that was kind of the culture of, like, it was a live and let live kind of place. And so, but we, it's just like everywhere, really. We're struggling as a society and a community um, to kind of create space for people here. And I think that was if you look back at the history of the Bray, it was Archie's dream to have artists come to Montana because there weren't a ton of folks here. And so it was about bringing people from outside to invest a little bit in our community and then send them back out into the world to further their own dreams. So I do think, as we're kind of the sort of interview process allows us to sort of really, for me, to dial down into, how do we create more stability for the residents? How do we create the resources that they need to thrive? And that's part of that sort of tailored experience they have with me in a weird way, where I'm like, hey, these are some resources you might need while you're here. Please communicate with me. Versus it kind of being, hey, you know, like Sana is currently here. Susama, you know, she came as a resident in '84. That experience is very different than the experience she's having currently, right? And she was very much on her own in that experience and didn't have any resources and didn't have someone that she could go to that she felt could help her navigate if she's riding her bike and people are yelling at her and all that kind of stuff, right? And so I do think we're working toward, you know, for me, it's open communication. It's like, hey, these are places we find safe and welcoming here in Montana. We share those lists of resources, of their grocery stores or coffee shops or whatever, that kind of stuff. Because I think that interview process and that transparency process allows us to really like have more conversations with people earlier before they get here. So part of that funny like earlier start date and like announcement date that they get, you know, they're given the hey, you're coming to the Bray, or we'd like to invite you to the Bray. There's a lead up time that we're able to give more orientation also before they get here to prepare for being here. Because I think a lot of people will be like, you know, we had like 3 summer residents that showed up with no car. That's a difficult thing here to show up. And then, you know, because it's also, you're here to work in the studio, especially in the summer. You know, riding your bike at dawn and then at, you know, midnight, those are difficult things to do here. It's just not particularly safe. We don't have even sidewalks on the road for you to, you know, so navigating that stuff with them to help them. Back to the question of like, what are the things we've done to help with kind of more transparency and more, I think, inviting culture, is that we've also opened up the visiting artist space as a proposal process. So that's kind of an open, it's not part of the regular application process. It's a process that's open year round now for people that could see themselves here for a 4 to 6 week stint. They put together a proposal. We review that with staff members and then try to schedule them in, versus it only being an invitational process. And I think that's, you know, it's slow to start, but I do feel like the more we can open up the kind of, if you can see yourself here, we can see you here too. Like that kind of, but I think in that the Bray does have this problem of like, it being seen as this exclusive club that people get to go to. And I'm really working to try to find that, because I think even like one of our current residents, she's like, oh, I'm too old to apply to be a long-term. I was like, no, you're not. Like, just apply. The truth is, you know, it's like folks are, I think we, you know, I do think in our hearts we crave kind of the diversity in the experience, because you don't know what that person will contribute to the program. And, you know, I think in like you and I have taught lots of workshops and stuff. And to me, the best workshops are where we have the kind of elders and the young people and the sort of cross collaboration that can happen with that experience. It's like so enriching for both sides of that coin. And so I think that's what we're really trying to do here with the kind of more of our kind of transparent process, but also just like out there being in the world of like encouraging folks to apply, because I think those avenues are open now. Like they weren't open in the past. It was more like, oh, call the director and see if they have space. And I'm really trying to push our organization away from that kind of working process, because I do think it's limiting then to only folks that feel entitled to be here. And I really want it to be a space where any person could come if they have a love of ceramics and a dedication to developing their practice, or, you know, sort of seeing themselves grow here in some fashion.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com.
The Bray Clay business is your best source for Bray epoxy, a two-part moldable epoxy intended for post-firing repairs. Working like clay, it's easy to shape, texture, fill gaps, and recreate missing parts. Bray epoxy is sold in tan, white, and black base colors, and we also have a 9-color kit that will allow you to perfectly disguise your repair. Order online anytime at archiebrayclay.com.
There's some things that are good or bad for creativity, and one of those that's bad for creativity is financial stress. Over the years, the Bray has handled that for the residents in different ways. So in the 80s, and I have learned this from interviewing a lot of past residents, in the 80s and up into the 90s, and I'm sure before, almost every resident had a job in town because they needed to. Like they needed extra income.
Of course.
And the benefit of that is that they got to know the community because they were working at the grocery store or working at the flower shop or, wherever they were working. But then as we progress into the 2000s, there was a push, and even later, to give the residents a stipend so that they didn't necessarily have to work in town. They could if they wanted, but they didn't have to. But as soon as you get a stipend, unless it goes up with inflation or with the rising cost of living, all of a sudden you have people that are getting not enough money to live there, but they also haven't been encouraged to then go in town and get a job. So this is a long, convoluted way of saying, how do you financially support residents, but also encourage them to be a member of the community?
Yeah, I mean, the history of the Bray is most of the residents in the 75 years paid to be here, right? I mean, truly. So I think when I was a resident in 2012, we were the first group minus one resident of the long terms that didn't have jobs. 9 of us were employed by basically having our stipend in addition to sales or I workshopped a lot. I did, those kinds of things. So I would say this is that tricky, hard thing. Because if you look at when I was a resident, so this is 2012 to 2014, long-term resident, a fully funded fellowship was $15,000. Of that $15,000, I got $6,000 or $6,500, something like that for the year. Recently, we've done the math again, and a fully funded long-term fellowship is closer to $32,000 now, and the residents get $7,500 as a fellowship. So that is, and the reality is when, this is that slow process of, I think I've done a bit of research into trying to figure out basically what does it help, or, what does a human need to feel stable? Because if we're stable, then we have creativity, right? We have to feel like we're safe in order to be creative. It's very difficult to be food scarce or home scarcity, any of that kind of stuff, and then feel stable and I've got the freedom to create. So it's financial, it's community, and it's purpose, right? Those are sort of the 3 keys to having stability. When the residents show up, they have one of those things. They have purpose, right? They don't have financial security, and then they have to rebuild a community temporarily here. So I think in part, this goes back to the kind of orientation week, trying to say, hey, we're also your community. Use this as a resource because you're not going to know what you need. So trying to do that. Also, that everybody starting seems to help them build community pretty quickly within their dynamic. Financially, I have been basically right now, half of our residents have jobs in town. I've kind of pushed back to hey, you're going to need to get a place in town or get some work in town because your fellowship is not going to cover your costs. Right now, the Bray views the stipend as to help cover studio fees. Is how they kind of look at that. It's supposed to help you with your studio practice. I'm pushing right now to working with our new development director to try to raise the stipend that folks are given, because I think there is this, the money the money that is available within a organization like this, a nonprofit organization, is variable and shifting and ever changing, and I think it's also part of the reason I came on here was to advocate for the residents, to say, hey, there's a need here. People are unhappy. Or the idea that, like when I was a resident, when I was a summer resident, I paid $200 a month to stay someplace. When I was a long-term resident, I had a 2-bedroom apartment for $400. Our current residents are averaging $1,200 a month for rent individually, right? So, and then you add on all the other life expenses, right? The cost of living here has tripled at a minimum. So what used to be kind of this remote place you could go and you could exist off, less than $1,000 a month is no more. And so it is trying to, I do feel like this kind of nonprofit funding, it's always playing catch up, trying to figure out how to fund that. So I am hoping that we will make progress in that. But it is slow going, because I think, when I look at different, when you start to break down like, hey, can you explain? Because I'm not a nonprofit person. I don't quite understand that model. So it is trying to figure out how, because I think what's been troublesome to me is that the Bray appears to have a lot of resources, right? We've built these big buildings. We have all this stuff. We've been increasing staff because really we built up as an organization before we had the manpower to staff it. And so we're trying to build up some of that so we can actually have a functioning education department and a functioning clay biz. So it does appear we have all these resources, right? We're able to pay staff and do all this stuff. And from where I sit, I was like, hey, this organization, the heart of this organization is the residency program. And while a lot of services revolve around them and are here to support them, they are financially most vulnerable here on campus. We can't insure them. We can't, they're covered, some a bit by kind of an umbrella liability type of thing, but we can't offer them, kind of health insurance. They're poverty living, trying to figure out how to be artists in the world, right? So, I do feel like it's my job to point that stuff out and say, hey, we need to do better. We need to work towards this. And so, and figure out ways that we can subsidize them, so that if we can't necessarily raise their stipend, we can subsidize firings or do things like that, sort of try to make the burden of being here, the financial burden of it at this point. Because I do think, and, I also think the Bray is a big carrot. People will sacrifice their well-being to be here. And I want to take that really serious and make sure we're not putting people in beyond their capacity of vulnerability, right? I want to make sure that they are finding some agency in town, or that they're able to do that type of stuff, but also be here a little bit, I think. And that's kind of the Braves had kind of a decade where people were here all the time. But the truth is, if people need to work in town, they can't be here all the time. And so it is kind of this teeter-totter of, uh, let's figure that out. And so I do feel like it's on the table right now, and we're strategizing to kind of improve that. But there is no good answer really for that at the moment, other than this is what we have. And there are resources in town to get a job these days, but it's still lean living. That's the hard part. But because it's also like we're doing things in the community too that are so difficult. It's like trying to find housing has become impossible here. It's been so difficult. And just because people can make more money renting their place out on Airbnb or whatever that is. So we don't have as much long-term housing. And then summer housing is just really difficult because people can rent their spare rooms for, quite $1,200 a month versus a $200 a month kind of like, I'll just rent my room for the summer or whatever. And that's just the reality. So I know that looking at housing is also something that we're seriously looking at as an institution of, do we build housing? Do we buy someplace in town where people can do it? But those are at this moment, those are huge investments, So to me, it's kind of like maybe we just give the residents more money, and at least for at least for the long terms, right? Give them more money, and then we can, we're trying to figure out all that stuff, because that is the weird thing here. We're remote enough and a small town enough that There's not new developments. There's not, it's like even like we're working or trying to sort of get in with Carroll College to maybe do like summer housing for folks. Um, but then it is kind of like, people want to bring their animals and all this. And so it's like, oh, we can't accommodate those things. If you want to try to find something, you can, but our resources have dwindled and dwindled. Before it used to be I don't know how you found it when you came, but it was like there were lots of resources, friends of the brave, people that were able to rent a room or do that kind of stuff and make it much more amenable to kind of, temporary living here.
Yeah, and when I came last, I was a long-term resident from 2018 into 19, and it was pre-COVID. And the thing that's changed is that in the COVID times, people realized they could work remotely. So massive amounts of people moved to Montana.
Right.
And if they move from the West Coast, Montana housing is cheap. Like they can sell a California house and for a fifth of the cost buy a Montana house and save for retirement. So a lot of people did that. And then as you mentioned, there's also a lot of summer tourism. So Airbnb in the summer and even year round, the people that do live here that own their house, they turn to that to make money to, help them live, which I don't fault them for that. But there's also just in the US, we don't have like a public housing authority in a state like Montana that's going to build houses. It's private development that has to build the houses, or places like Habitat for Humanity. I actually went to a lecture last time I was in town for the guy that ran Habitat for Humanity, and he talked about that there's a mass, like Helena needs 200 to 300 more homes to make it more affordable, not 10.
Right. Yeah, no, I know. It's a conundrum here, and I think it's and it is just one of those things where a lot of other institutions that are similar to us, they have housing on campus, or they, that's kind of a perk they're able to do. So I do think, um, and it's just like, it's one of those weird things of, oh, should we have built an education building or should we have built housing? That would have been a better use, like maybe that just but it's like, I think, but when I was a resident, I also didn't wanna live on campus housing. I had pets, I have life, I didn't wanna have to share spaces with people. Also, I didn't wanna have to, because a lot of those places like, "Oh, you can't have pets," or you can't, you kind of are still college living in a way, and I came here as an adult and wanted to live my life and have a partner or do the things that you do. So, yeah, it's kind of there's a double-edged sword, but I think to make this place a little more, we've gotta that's one of those things we gotta really work on as an institution, trying to help mitigate that problem a little bit.
I wanted to talk about you settling in Montana. Our timelines at the Bray overlapped. I was a summer resident when you were full time, so we got to know each other. But then after that, we actually both went to California, to different parts of California, and I thought, oh, she's going to be in California forever.
I know.
You had gotten a studio. You were like settled in there. It was a beautiful, nice studio. And then you moved though back to Helena because well, just tell us why, as a working artist, that's a successful working artist, like what does Helena give you now at this stage in your life?
Yeah, it's funny. I think when I was in because I went in Sacramento, there was a lot that went into that, right? I really was thinking, okay, Sacramento's going to be my home base. This is where I'm going to be. Um, but when I moved back from when I was a resident, moved back to California, with every intention of staying there. I'm also a California baby. I grew up in Southern California. That's kind of home base for me. I'd always traveled away and then come back. That was kind of my model. And so, what I actually discovered was in the development of my career, my lifestyle changed. So, what was totally fine before I sort of went further down this ceramic path, I would drive to San Francisco to see friends. I'd drive to Napa to see friends. I would sort of really commute to see my community and my people. And when that shift in my career took place, I was traveling so much more. So then going to see friends in San Francisco or going to Napa, like it just didn't do it because I was tired from traveling for work and I just wanted to be home. And so that community shift in my brain of I have all these people in California was actually I've got 2 or 3 people that I can kind of see once in a while. And so really I was pretty lonely. And as much as I was trying to develop the studio practice that was kind of a shared community space, I was away too much to make that work, to run it as a business because in supporting that, I had to go workshop and go away. And it just ended up being like, this is not working. And so, I ended up closing the studio because I was just like, this is not, it's not what I'm going to do. And of course, as soon as I closed the studio, I had like so many people ask for, like to want to rent space. I was like, of course, that's the way it is. But, and I think in part it also, as much as Montana's not much better, the fires in California were getting really bad, and I was like, "Wow, this is really intense," and I didn't see any opportunity for me to own a home in California. I was just like, "I'm priced out of this market," and that it was really something I kind of wanted to do. So, like I mentioned earlier, was a lot of my resident pool settled in Montana, settled here. And like Giselle had gone away for a couple years up to Colorado, had moved back. And I thought, oh, you know what? I have more friends here. And I was kind of looking for a new home base. And I was kind of most of my family's up in Portland, Oregon. And then there was all these friends here in Montana. So I was like, I'm going to move to Montana and see how that is. And my goal was like, oh, I'll give it 6 months. And then maybe I'll go to Portland and see what 6 months there is like. And then I got here and it was fine. I kind of was like, "Oh, this is great." And I was so happy that I moved when I did because it was kind of into 2018, into 2019, and then 2020 happened, and I was so glad that I had a community of people that we could get together every week and have dinner, and a lot of people doing what I do, but also just like however they're doing it. And so I felt like it was an extension of that core group of friends I made during my residency that kind of has expanded and then into a kind of love for living here and enjoying the seasons, enjoying the kind of quiet small town kind of life, compared to sort of I mean, there's lots of things I miss about California. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the farmers markets here do not compare to California farmers markets, but that's okay. I have other things that are good here. Because like I was able to buy a house and, I'm doing that kind of experiment at this point and like, I have a decent life here. It makes me happy. So, and then also I think it's that, even as a former resident, you always sort of develop everyone here that I know that has been a former, and there's quite a few people that have settled here that were former residents. Everybody has to develop their relationship to the Bray. There's kind of, there can be a complicated relationship. There can be like a love of this place. There's a whole gamut of however you want to figure out how to interact with this place. It's up to you in sort of that art space because it's also our local like clay store and and art talks and things like that. And also, you know, people or you want to know in the art world come through here. So it is this beautiful like resting stop for people that come through.
And because the Bray is a cultural hub, and Helena, to be honest, is a cultural hub for Montana. I mean, there are not that many cities in Montana.
This is true, yeah. And that Helena is a cultural hub is like, whoa, really? But it is.
It's crazy to think about it, but it is. But it's interesting, like you mentioned, how many people come through the Bray at some point as visiting artists. I mean, there's been like 800 residents in 75 years.
That's wild.
Isn't
Yeah.
that crazy? And actually, it was 800 as of 2 years ago. So actually, it's more than that now. And I think we'd figured out that also included staff, which had been, I don't know, 200 staff over 70. Like, there's a lot of people that have come there. So it's just interesting to think about this place as a hub, but it's really a former brick factory. So
Right. Yeah.
kind of its greatest asset can also be its liability in that you're in and around an old brick factory. Like the towel building is still there. We're trying to figure out what to do with it right now. The big kilns are still there. There's all this like sort of remnants of its industrial past, which I think is like so beautiful when you're on the campus, but it also means like when they were building the new wood shop, you had to figure out like, okay, where are we going to put the new wood shop relative
Right.
to the ruins, so to speak.
Exactly. I know, and that's that funny thing of like also trying to figure out how to make this place accessible for differently abled people. That's also that thing of like, we just got piles of brick fucking everywhere. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so it is kind of like, it is this, but man, when I was a resident, it was like every day was kind of, I just was like, I can't believe I get to go work here every day. Like it just really was magical in that way. And your first snows, and I mean, this place has a real beauty to it. And I think, and maybe it's also like kind of in my kind of artist expression is like, I love ruins. I love old industrial space. Like it's just amazing to me. So to me, it was really always has that charm. And I think, but it is like for some folks that it can be great, and some people it's difficult. I've been thinking of Ryan Kelly, who was here this last January, and we have a little journal in the visiting artist house that he like, I am almost out of coffee and there's no one here. It's so cold. It's -28. What do I do? Like, it's just like, it felt like the Donner Pass party or something. I was like, oh God, poor Ryan, but it's also like, some people is like, oh, I just love it. It's so quiet here. Other people are like, they might find my bones. I don't know what to do. So, but it is kind of, and that's the thing, it's like, it's amazing for people that it makes sense for, and even the people that at some point is like, "Oh, this place is not for me, I can't wait to get out of here." It still has, that's one of the things I am always kind of trying to tell the new residents is, because I think those 800 people, I'd be curious how many people stayed here, right? The truth is a very few number comparatively, and that most of the residents, they're passing through. And, like, staff will be here, but even then, the staff passes through as well. Um, but that for me, when I walk down the hall, the ghosts of my resident mates are there. If I'm standing in front of Yanina's studio or whoever, I'm just like, "Oh, Peter Johnson was in here," or, "Oh," it's like, I think they're there in my head and my heart, even 10 years later, 15 years later, and even coming in as staff. Like, I'll stand in their doorway and I think, "Oh, I'm standing in front of Chris Pickett's door." Like, I just like, it's there, and and that is, I think that's what's one of the complicated, interesting things about the Bray, is that all those residents you mentioned, the 800 people, for them, that is also true. Like, that their memory of this place is of their time here. And the change that folks see here, for some it's positive, for some it's negative. It's like, "Ah, this shouldn't be for everybody," or this, like, we have those kind of, that, you know, the kind of resistance to change and the need to change. Those things are ever warring here, in a crazy way. And so, because I think, it's, I think when you love a place, you it's like inherent that you're going to be critical of it in some fashion, but also in that people are very passionate about their experiences here and their time here. And I think for the residents, that's something in modern day, I try to sort of emphasize, of like, make the most of your moment here, because it will be with you for your life. And the friends that you make here, they become possibly some of your best friends and, colleagues in this experience that we're having. Um, and so I do think it's an interesting, uh, m mix of feelings that, accompany with this place, because I think that's what's, interesting of, like, Sana being here and her 40 years between visits. I mean, 40 years between visits, and, it's like, I don't the thing is, like, the resident hall wasn't there, she was here with 2 other people as residents, right? It wasn't ever always at 10 and 10 or whatever that looked like, so I think, and her experience now is so different than the time that she had previous. She's also a different person this time, but I think it's so interesting because, um, I had some visitors come this summer who were former residents, former board members, and like, I don't even recognize this place has changed so much. And it's like, that's the nature. It's like, in your mind when you leave this place, it is one thing, but it continues to grow and evolve beyond you. And so I think, I'm always sort of pushing for that, contribution. What's your contribution here gonna be? Are you gonna leave art, or are you going to leave inspired, or is that, how are you in the relation to your resident mates, the staff, whoever, I think that's also that crazy thing of, like, some of my best friends were staff members. I think those relationships, I mean, that's the weird thing. People come here to make art, but really they leave with very, intense relations to folks. And I think, that's sort of the beauty of a kind of long-term cohort, is warts and all, because there can be bad things that happen and stressful things, but it's still like it's kind of your dysfunctional family while you're here, it's like you become family, the best and worst part sometimes, but it's also, I think, can be really enriching.
What's the residency deadline for this year's applications?
So the deadline for long-term and short-term resident applications is December 19th this year.
Okay.
And then the visiting artist is up year-round, and we usually review those in sort of the fall kind of thing right now.
Well, thanks so much, Sunshine. I really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it.
I'd like to thank Sunshine for coming on the show, and I have enjoyed seeing the positive impact she's had as the resident coordinator at the Bray. Before we go, I wanted to thank today's sponsors. That's the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art, the Archie Bray Foundation, and Cornell Studio Supply. If you or your organization is interested in being a sponsor on the show, you can get in touch at brickyardnetwork.org. Don't forget to shop my holiday sale at carterpottery.com, and I will be back next week with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.